Welcome back to the Be and Become podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Bitton, and today we're going to be discussing the conversation around the mental health challenges that our leaders are facing, both in our workplaces as well as in our daily lives. I'm here today with our amazing Eboni Harris, licensed counselor, co-founder of Melanin Mental Health, and the CEO of Operationally. Thank you so much for joining, Eboni.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. It was so amazing to see some of your content around really what this podcast is all about, which is all about how can we actually help those who impact others so that they can feel supported, so that they can actually carry on that supportive, empathetic leadership that we need so much in this day into their workplaces, into their teams, and have that be the new approach to business strategy as we know it. We've kind of gone, as both of us, we are serial entrepreneurs, we have that in common. So we understand how important our energy and our, the way we show up, how important it is in terms of how we show up with regards to the success of our businesses.
Right.
So we understand that. But I do know that there are still a number of corporate workplaces that don't understand how important the mental health and well-being and balance and harmony, how important that is for our leaders. And, normally I know for myself being a corporate well-being strategist, I understand that there's a lot of initiatives like, okay, we're going to have a mental health day. Maybe we'll do a speech. Maybe we'll do a workshop and that'll be our mental health strategy. But we know that that's not going to cut it. Right. What do you think is the most, the biggest necessity for our leaders today, our 2025 leaders of today in corporate, but also in nonprofit and other environments as well? What do you think is most needed now?
I think when it comes to being a leader, it's really tapping into the human element. I think that's where we struggle sometimes, especially when we're working for organizations where productivity or getting people motivated and things like that, we're kind of focused on the outcomes, which is important, of course, but also like who are we as individuals and who are we as we show up in those communities, or I call it a community, but in those organizations. And so when we can like tap into the human aspect, that we all have emotions, we all have different personality traits, we all have these parts of us that show up in these different spaces, and how do we show up authentically, but also how do we show up where we are able to be honest and vulnerable in like what's coming up for us, right? Because there's this belief that we should be able to like put any personal things we have to the side and just focus on the work. And while that's idealistic and it would be great if we could all be robots in that way, I guess for the organization at least, there's a lot of humanity that comes up. There's a lot of things that come up for us as we are in these leadership positions. And so how are we actually tapping into that to help us become better leaders and to be able to identify that in humanity in the people that we lead?
So it's very interesting when I hear so many of us talk about how, well, we should make sure that our leaders feel human, or we should have spaces where we recognize the humanity of leaders. That's always a little bit funny to me, because it's kind of like, well, of course they're leaders. Why, or rather, they're of course humans. Of course they're humans. We know that they're humans. So how did we get here where we actually need to now intentionally remind everybody that leaders are humans? Where did that come from?
I think it comes from this idea of as we get higher up into organizations, then there's this perception that you should be a all-knowing person, that you should be able to do everything, that you should be able to handle every interaction and communication and all of that perfectly, because that's how you got up into those positions. Mm-hmm. But in reality, so a lot of times when people hire us to come in or hire my organizations to come in and help, we're focusing on people that are in non-management, non-leadership roles, right? We're focusing on supporting the staff and things like that. And so oftentimes leaders are forgotten because they feel like you've had the assumption is you've had the training. The assumption is you know what you're doing in all of these situations. And what we learn when we're working with the team members, when we're working with the people that are under the management of these people, is that a lot of times there's still a struggle in being able to connect with the leaders. There's still a struggle with leaders being able to communicate effectively, motivate effectively, all of those things, because they may have done some training, but they haven't been able to figure out how to incorporate it in an effective way. And so I think that there's this belief that the higher up you get into an organization, that you've done your due diligence, or you've done the training, or you have the experience. And so there isn't as much emphasis on understanding that they still will have to show up as they're still humans, right? And they still show up with everyday baggage or the things that they have going on, just
Mm-hmm.
like the other employees of the organization show up. So yeah, I think that's where it comes from, is just this belief that like once you get to a certain point, you have whatever it is, the mental fortitude or whatever it is to like
Mm-hmm.
take on all of these challenges. And so um, support isn't always given to those leaders.
Yes. And that seems to be the common element that I'm hearing in so many of our conversations. I'm actually going to be interviewing an HR executive later today, actually. And when her and I were discussing her episode, she told me a story about how her CEO came into her office and was upset and was dealing with a lot of personal issues. And he really was actually transparent and shared the fact that, it is very lonely at the top. We know this. The thing is, we know this in terms of metaphor. We know this that successful people can be very lonely. I know that for myself, sometimes as we rise or we go and we move up to different levels, we sometimes have to shift our circles that
Yeah.
don't longer, just don't no longer align with us. We find that we kind of I don't know if you've experienced this yourself, but I know I have, where, sometimes when we become a little bit more successful, we have more responsibilities, we tend to lose touch with the kind of issues and realities of those who are not on our level or not, carrying the same responsibilities that we're carrying.
Yeah.
So I guess what I want to know is, we know that there is an element of loneliness mainly because, people don't really talk to the boss.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just one of those things where, their door's closed. They're kind of this sort of like, you know, ominous presence in the office that nobody actually, gets close to.
Mm-hmm.
How can we break that loneliness? How can we break it so that an employee, even as something, level, regardless of what the level is, to the point where we can create an environment where even an intern can walk into a CEO's work, office and say, how are you feeling today? How are you feeling today? How's your week going? And actually allow that sort of compassionate conversation to take place. What would be necessary in terms of, implementing programs or whatever it may be? What needs to happen for that kind of work culture to exist?
That's a big question. It's a good question, but that's a big question, because the reality is a lot of times as you ascend in an organization, as you're becoming, getting higher positions and things like that, there is a shift in the type of relationships you can have with the other people at the organization, right? There, or at least there's
Mm-hmm.
a belief that there is, right? Because oftentimes it's hard to have a personal relationship with the person who evaluates your work. It's hard to have a person or a compassionate relationship with the person that could possibly fire you if something happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if these lines are created, and I think a lot of leaders aren't necessarily wanting those lines to be created, but they just kind of lean into it because it's kind of it is what it is. And so I do
Mm-hmm.
think there has to be some, when I talk about like uh oh, I just lost my train of thought. When I talk about these parts of us that come up, I think it's extremely important for us to understand that, like, if you are a manager or a leader, right, there's a part of you that has to, like, make decisions and
Mm-hmm.
may have to reprimand people or things like that. That's just a part
Mm-hmm.
of the role that you're in. And so, is there a way for you to acknowledge, like, hey, like, sometimes I have to be in the leadership role, but sometimes
Mm-hmm.
be in the peer role, right? Sometimes I can
Mm,
sit in here and be in the compassionate coworker or whatever role, right? And how I hate to say it this way, but sometimes the leader has to demonstrate like I can have these roles, but I also have to like make sure that you understand that there are boundaries within these roles, right? But I
mhm,
think to your point, there is a lot of loneliness because, especially if you've been with a company for a while, where you had these relationships with people and you've built this like companionship and all of that, and then as you get more higher to the top or closer to the top, then there are less people that you're engaging with. People don't
mhm.
feel comfortable coming to talk to you because it's like, well, now they have this role. I don't know if I can have the same banter we've had before, or if I have concerns or complaints, then I don't know if that's my space to or my place to come to you and tell you that because now we're not in the
Mm,
same level, so it feels a little different if I'm talking to you about it.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
And so I do think there's something around how do leaders create these spaces, or I mean, and not yeah, sure, employees can do it as well, but I think it's up to the leaders a lot of times to create spaces where, hey, we can have like candid conversations, and where we can air out our grievances and talk about these things. And will I be able to completely pretend like I didn't have this conversation? Probably not, because now I'm in a role to be able to do something about it. But we can have it in a way that there aren't any consequences, right? Maybe we have
mm,
office hours where you get to come in and we get just chat about what's going on,
mm,
and have these conversations where there's no risk of retaliation, there's no risk of
mm.
like it being even like said who told me these things, but now I have information that I can like use if needed, or if you wanted just to be like, I just need to talk to you and just chat, or I wanted us to be able to have a look like a back and forth, we can do
Yeah.
that as well. You get to like give them the opportunity to determine like or decide how they want to spend that time. I think can be helpful. So again, just understanding that as a leader, you're gonna have different hats and different roles that you
Mhm,
take on, and being able to choose and decide when those parts of those roles come out, and being able
mm.
to decide and have a team that understands like, yeah, like I can have lunch with the CEO and it's a good conversation and we're just talking and it's cool, but maybe when we're in this environment I understand that there's a certain level of respect because now they put that CEO hat back on, and so
Mm,
I
mm.
shift my perception of them as well, right? Because they're showing up differently. And so I think just leaning into like the fact that we have these different parts of us that have to show up in these different spaces, and how do we kind of help people understand through like boundaries and just example that like it's okay to have all of these parts, but
Mm.
how to respect it depending on the environment that we're in.
I love that. I think that's so critical is being able to mitigate those various roles. And again, I think that honestly, like the fact that we're entrepreneurs, we understand that because we are the show. So it's like we're always switching roles and switching hats. But there is that implication that maybe our leaders don't have that kind of training on how to seamlessly you know, keep those different hats, but also do it in a way that keeps their respect, but also keeps a certain level of emotional safety. I do think that's a really important insight is that, of course, people might be a lot more guarded with a higher up if they feel like there might be some kind of recourse or some kind of consequence to what they're sharing with their CEO or their managers. I do love this idea of switching roles. I do know that for myself, I'm an educator as well. I'm here at the school studio actually, and I know that my colleague, we have a way of kind of switching when we're friends and we're talking about personal things and it's casual, and when we have to show the students that we are in our teacher mode. And so I know that, for example, what we'll do is instead of saying instead, like when we're casual, she'll call me Rebecca. But when we're in front of students and, we need to kind of change that hat, she'll say Miss Bitten and she'll call me Miss Bitten and I'll call her Miss
Yeah.
Iqbal. And so that is a great way for us to kind of shift, do that sort of code switch, right? I want to, just as we kind of come to the next last few minutes, and of course, I'd love to invite you back because I'm sure there's so much we can share and discuss as well. This is just a preview, but I was hoping you can tell me a story about maybe a time where you've worked with not just a leader, but on this podcast we really speak to people who are high performing, people who are driven by their purpose, whether they're a CEO of their own company or even just an employee as well in their workplace and otherwise. Our audience is really about people who are goal oriented and they want to really make something out of themselves, and they have that pressure on them. I was wondering if maybe in your counseling experience or even just in your own experience, can you tell us about a time where, you were dealing with someone who is, characteristically hard on themselves or puts a lot of pressure on their performance? Can you tell me about a time when there was a shift where they learned how to let their guard down, be warm, show their vulnerability, and be, I hate using this word of like, oh, we need to be human now. But have you seen that kind of shift in any of your clients? And what did that type of shift require? Like, was there a time where you worked with someone that may have had a lot of vulnerability issues, weren't able to open up to their support staff? What changed for them? What needed to change for them to finally breathe a sigh of relief and embrace that vulnerability and that transparency with themselves and their group?
So I work a lot with Black women who are leaders, high performing CEOs, things like that. And a lot of times there is this like mask that has to be worn
Mm,
because there has to be, proving how good, how smart, how they
mm-hmm,
deserve, and things like that. And so I do think that it's a lot of things based in like reality that makes it difficult for them to like be able to be more open or authentic when in their careers. And so a lot of the work that we do is on internal safety. I know there we talk about like safe spaces and things
love
like
that.
that, but I really help people understand the importance of you are your safe space. And
Mm,
so that means that you get to go out into the world, you get to make mistakes, you get to, be embarrassed or have these maybe not so great experiences and great ones, but then you get to come home to your safe space. And so the more that we teach them how to be compassionate for themselves, the more that we
mm-hmm,
teach them how to like trust their gut and like who they are and what they know to be true and all of that, and to calm the other parts of them that tell them they're not good enough, to calm the parts of them that tell them they have to show up a specific way in order to be respected and all
mm-hmm,
of that. The more that we teach them that, they feel more comfortable going out and kind of testing the waters in the world and testing the waters at their, in their careers. And with that, that doesn't mean it's going to go perfect every time. That doesn't mean people are going to accept them and see them as they are or anything like that. But that means they feel more comfortable with showing up more authentically more often. Right? I'm not
mm-hmm,
saying all the time, but more authentically more often, because if the world happens to kick them down, they know they have a safe space to come back
mm,
to internally that can build them back up. So I think that's a lot of the work that has to be done with leaders in general is, yes, there isn't a perfect way to navigate this. It just isn't. And so how do you create a space internally and maybe a little bit externally? Maybe you have a
mm.
support system outside of work. Maybe you have these spaces that you can go to. But how do you create these safe spaces where you can go, you can try things out, you can make mistakes, you can have big wins, but you know that you have a safe space to come to once it's all said and done.
I love that so much. Actually, like in my Be and Become coaching, one of the things that I do with my clients is I help them come up with toolkit, their own toolkit of coping mechanisms, even just thought patterns, like even just coming to a mantra or a grounding mantra, or, being able to tap into whether it's a meditation or time, whatever the modality is. The core importance is we need to be emotionally sovereign. I call it like self sovereignty, where it's that exactly the same as you were saying, that internal safety, where it's like, I may not have people flooding my office asking me how I'm doing or checking in on me. I got to be checking in on myself and be my own safe space. And I think that's such an important part of
Yeah.
our well being. I know for myself, as I was going through so many different episodes of manic mania and depression, I realized that I was trying everything and I wasn't doing what I needed to do for myself. I needed to find my own way of healing that worked for me, and not, I find sometimes a lot of people, they rely on therapists, they rely on all of these things, kind of like a crutch, but they don't have those skills to be able to regulate and
Right.
be their own best friend. And I think that's such an important message to share, no matter if you're a high performer or not, but especially if you're a high performer, to recognize how you can actually be your own best friend rather than your worst enemy. I know that that is also something that's very
Yeah.
common amongst leaders, is that sometimes we ourselves are actually the ones that are giving ourselves the tough time, that are giving ourselves the criticism. And I really resonate with your clients, the idea of wearing a mask all the time. I think this is really what needs to change, is we need to take off the mask so that everybody can also feel
Yeah.
comfortable taking off that mask and understand that, those roles are not masks, they're just hats. They're interchangeable like hats.
Right.
They're not going to take away our authenticity or cover who we are, physically, mentally, and emotionally. They're just different roles so that we can align with the particular situation and what needs to happen in that space with those people at those times. So wonderful, wonderful insights,
Yeah.
just a real preview of all the amazing value that you shared with us. I'm so impressed by all of the amazing things that you're doing. It's no mistake that we gravitated towards each other. I tend to always gravitate towards amazing change making serial entrepreneurs doing amazing things for, the amazing impact, which is really what fuels
Yeah.
us in the end. It's really what keeps our wheels turning, is this undying need to serve and make an impact. So thank you so much for your impact and for your amazing insights and your warmth and your honesty in sharing these today. I wish you honestly the best with this operationality. I saw some of the most amazing things that you're doing, really allowing business owners to empower themselves in taking control of their customer experience journey as well as their internal journey. So, congratulations to you, Ebony. I wish you the absolute best,
Thank
and
you.
I hope this is an amazing new week for you. And we hope to see you soon on another episode. Until then, have a wonderful time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Okay. Bye.